Madam Chair. I often find myself trying to imagine a situation where every American woke up every morning and got hit in the head with a hammer. And if that happened, we would probably think, we should probably stop hitting people in the head with hammers. Alternatively, we could, spend a lot of money to invest in helmet technology. And President Jewell, you are dealing with the consequences of climate change and the helmets from levees to flood insurance and all the things you have to grapple with. And I have a lot of sympathy with my friend, Mr. Graves, because he represents a district where the economy depends on hammer manufacturing. That's really hard. And we've got to grapple with that. But I want to focus on the helmet because that was the subject of your testimony. The IPCC report that recently came out described climate change as, I think they said the rate of climate change is outpacing our ability to adapt. The NOAA report that just came out said that we've got 2 feet of sea level rise on the Gulf Coast by 2050. I'm just curious, you sitting there as the president of your parish, how many of the homes in your parish are within 2 feet of sea level?
I don't have that number off the top of my head, but we do have a fair number of homes that are close to sea level or just above.
Okay, so if I was to move to St. Charles Parish tomorrow and try to get a 30-year mortgage, because by 2050, that mortgage isn't going to be fully paid off. Could I get a 30-year mortgage if I was to move to St. Charles Parish?
You absolutely would be able to get a 30-year mortgage, but you probably wouldn't be able to afford your flood insurance.
Okay, and who's taking the risk of that mortgage? Because if you know it's going to be underwater in 30 years, who's holding that paper?
The banks are.
The Fannie and Freddie or the commercial banks?
Commercial banks. I mean, there is still active lending going on in St. Charles Parish, in coastal Louisiana, because we've made such investments like in levees and flood protection to protect us. But where we're seeing a lot of the inaction are on some of the big coastal restoration projects because of the hurdles that we have to jump through.
Do you carry much debt in your parish?
Do I carry much debt? No.
Yeah, no. If you wanted to go out and get long-term paper, if you've got a road you need to build where the cost of recovering that bond is going to get beyond 30 years, can you get that debt?
Absolutely.
What's happening there?
No, absolutely. We just did a bond against our Go Mesa revenues, which is I think a 30-year payment as well. So, but again, that money is going into things like coastal restoration, flood protection, and things like that.
Okay. Well, there was a CFTC report that came out under the Trump administration last year that looked at how financial risk was rippling through our financial sector. And they found that they echoed your point that commercial banks are still writing those mortgages, but they are increasingly putting those on to Fannie and Freddie. When I asked Chairman Powell last week if Fannie and Freddie were changing their risk profiles in response to that, he said no, but they should. I followed up by saying, okay, everything I know about finance, I spent 20 years in the energy industry. I built a lot of projects, raised a lot of money. Everything I know about finance is it depends on informational asymmetry. The old joke that if you sit at a poker table and you look around and you can't spot the fish, you better leave the poker table because you're the fish. And what that CFTC report found was that the more likely you are to be in a flood-prone region, the more likely the banks are to offload that risk onto Fannie and Freddie. So our failure to remove the hammer is causing the taxpayers to invest more and more in helmets, right? And the fear I have, and I think it goes to what all our witnesses are talking about, is that if we don't think about taking away the hammers, right? If we only focus on the helmets, we simply don't have enough money, right? And at some point, we're going to have horrible conversations, and the people who are going to lose are going to be the fish, right? The financial sector is going to move. And we got to focus on getting rid of those hammers, and I understand that pain. From a political perspective, with the time we have left, help us understand what happens to you if you don't get the money to invest in those helmets. If you have no choice but to tell people, all I can do is abandon the provision of this road. I can't rebuild that school. We simply can't protect that home. What happens to you politically?
Well, I think it's important to know that Louisiana has a plan, and that's very important. We have a coastal master plan that is a 50-year plan that is rooted in science to rebuild our coast. What we need is investment in coastal restoration projects, which right now comes from the funding of Go Mesa, those Outer Continental Shelf revenues. That is the only consistent funding source for our coastal plan. So an investment in that and things like the RISE Act will increase that Go Mesa revenue share. And they'll also give us a portion of offshore wind lease sales when that becomes viable in the Gulf of Mexico. So having that funding source is what we need. We need to increase that funding source, but we also need to eliminate those regulatory hurdles so that we can start doing these projects now, because we're losing over a football field of land every hour.
Well, I thank you for that, and I'm out of time, but when I look at the sea level rise that we know is coming, most of Louisiana south of I-10 is underwater. And I want to make sure that our next redistricting cycle, my friend Mr. Graves is still here and is not sitting there saying that my district is now underwater. I yield back.
And I've also been